back to the channel, Real Life Dietitian. I'm actually outside on my patio shooting this today because it was a nice quiet place. But I had several requests to do a video on either disease prevention or disease management for prediabetes, insulin resistance. So this is going to apply to you if you have been diagnosed with insulin resistance, prediabetes, polycystic ovarian syndrome or PCOS, or if you're just trying to manage, have already been diagnosed and are trying to manage type 2 diabetes, because they all come from the same underlying source, which is insulin resistance. So we're going to talk about from a dietary standpoint and a lifestyle standpoint how to manage this. Of course, there are often medications that are used with this too, and that's going to come more from your provider side. But today we're going to be talking about dietary management of these diseases. So just to give you a little bit of stats on this, 37 million Americans, or 1 in 10 Americans, have type 2 diabetes. Even more people have pre-diabetes. So it's estimated that about 96 million adults in the US, or about 38% of US adults, have a diagnosis of pre-diabetes. And then when it comes to PCOS, 7 to 10% of women of childbearing age have a diagnosis of PCOS. That's in the US. And that is one of the leading causes of infertility in the US as well, because insulin is a hormone. It affects other hormones, which eventually affects fertility as well in women. So what is this underlying cause? What exactly is insulin resistance in the first place? Well, in short, your body is working harder than it should have to in order to maintain normal blood sugar levels. So every time our sugar level goes up, think of it like a thermostat. So if the temperature in the room goes up, it makes the AC kick on to cool off the room. So same thing in the body. Every time your blood sugar levels go up from whatever the cause may be, your pancreas makes the hormone insulin to lower those sugars back to the normal rate. Also, if your sugar gets too low, your body sends out hormone signals for you to release glucagon, or stored sugar that you have stored in fat cells and in your liver, to release sugar back out. So the body tries to maintain a normal blood sugar level through these different hormones. So why would someone's body have to work harder to produce a higher amount of insulin to keep those blood sugars level? There's a multitude of factors that go into this. So in short, it's basically an increased demand for that insulin's hormone's job. So again, it's insulin resistant. So it's not necessarily a lack of insulin, although that can lead to that in the future. The insulin that the body is making is not working as effectively as it should. So it's having to produce more insulin to do the same job. And the reason it's having to produce more insulin, or the reason behind the insulin not working as effectively, can be a multitude of things. One of the biggest things being increased body weight from adipose or fatty tissue. So the more body mass we have, the more fatty tissue that we have, the more insulin resistant we are. So the insulin doesn't work as well in the presence of that fatty tissue as it does when we have less fatty tissue or more lean body mass. Another contributing factor would be a decreased energy demand. So if our body is utilizing less sugar, whether that's through less activity overall, less exercise, or lack of growth in the body. So the body doesn't have as high of a demand for energy any longer. And that can also increase the amount of insulin we have to use, because we're not burning that sugar up as effectively. Excess carbohydrate or energy intake, this kind of goes to the same thing. So we're not getting a balance. We're getting more sugar in than what we can burn. Some other factors might be genetics, stress, or steroids. Now, the last three are those uncontrollable factors to some extent. So we can't change our genetics. Maybe someone has to get steroid treatment for some other reason, and we can't change that. So what we're going to talk about in this video are, what are those contributors to insulin resistance that are within our control? What can we actively do to lessen the insulin resistance in our body? So number one is going to be weight reduction. So again, having less of that body fat tissue is going to reduce insulin resistance, make your insulin work more effectively in the body. Studies show that when we lose somewhere between 7 to 10% of our total body weight, that's when we start seeing decreased markers of insulin resistance. So if you've been diagnosed with prediabetes or insulin resistance, I would say have a goal to aim for 7 to 10% body weight reduction is what we're shooting for. And I recommend you achieve this weight loss with a combination of things. So from a dietary standpoint, we're gonna wanna decrease overall caloric intake, and we're gonna wanna decrease carbohydrates, particularly carbohydrates that are not metabolized as efficiently. So in particular, those refined carbs. So not all carbs are bad. We need carbs for energy, we need carbs for fiber, certain nutrients that can't be found in other foods. So I do not recommend you cut out carbs altogether, but we do need to reduce carbs, especially the carbs, again, that are not metabolized effectively. And that's gonna be carbohydrates from what we call refined or processed sugar. So carbs that release sugar very rapidly into the system. So essentially what happens with those is, when you hear carbs or sugars, I want you to think energy. So we get this energy in that releases rapid fire into the body, and we, at the moment that we ingest it, don't have a means to burn that sugar off. And so we have to produce insulin because we have excess, we have more than what we can burn. So we've got to produce insulin, and then insulin's job is to draw that excess sugar out of the blood, but it doesn't just make that sugar disappear. It sends that excess sugar into fat cells for storage in case we were to need it later. Problem is we typically don't need it later because we're eating so frequently and we don't have a high energy demand to pair that with. So we want to avoid those foods that release that sugar rapidly. So that's going to come, I always tell you, number one rule in this is get rid of sugary drinks. So liquid sugar is going to hurt you a lot more than solid sugar. So think of things like, of course, sodas, but fruit juices, sweet teas, frappuccinos, even sports drinks, regular sports drinks, or even a fruit smoothie can contain high volumes of liquid glucose, which we do not metabolize effectively. So get rid of those sugary drinks. Lots and lots of water, some occasional sugar substitutes would be okay, but get rid of sugary drinks altogether. Other foods are gonna be, that we wanna kind of decrease, are gonna be what we call concentrated sweets. So think of like candy bars, cakes, cupcakes, cookies, all of those sugary baked goods, icing. Not to say that you can't ever have those, especially, it being a special occasion, you can have things like that, but it shouldn't be something that you're consuming on a daily basis. So limiting how often we eat those foods and how much we eat those foods. And then number 3 on that, in the foods to really concentrate on reducing, is going to be these white starches. So white refined starches, things like white bread, white pasta, white potatoes, white rice, and trying to instead switch those for what we call complex carbohydrate or whole grain. So not all carbs are created equal. We're trying to get rid of those ones that release their sugar really quickly, that we can't follow up with vigorous exercise to burn off that energy. Kind of in the same category of when we're talking about limiting, so we're talking about getting rid of these refined sugars. While we're doing that, we want to be limiting high calorie foods because we're trying to reduce the total caloric intake as well in order to achieve weight loss. So some of your higher calorie foods are going to be from fats. Fats contain more calories per gram than any other food group. So even if you're restricting carbs a lot, if you're still eating high amounts of calories, this can keep you from burning fat stores. So I know the keto diet, for example, is really strict elimination of carbs and has a focus on consumption of fats. In fact, a true ketogenic diet is 80% fat. So you're gonna end up consuming a high amount of calories on that diet. And that's a whole topic for another day why I don't recommend that diet, but that's one of the reasons. So we've got to watch too, are we still limiting overall? Are we satisfying our nutritional needs, but still keeping the calories in a lower range to be able to achieve weight loss? So think about things like calorie dense foods, so fried foods, high saturated fat foods, so things like cheese, butter, bacon, ribeyes, sausage, those kinds of things we want to limit. And also the volume of your food, so your overall portions. Can you scale back on your portions of some of these higher calorie foods and maybe increase portions of lower calorie, lower carb foods so that you're still feeling full, but you're still hitting that calorie deficit when we do this? Also, frequency. I find a lot of people are eating meals and their meals maybe don't contain enough nutrients or enough calories, so they're getting hungry in between meals, and so their snacks oftentimes the calorie or carb intake from their snacks is more than what they're doing for meals in a day. And those snacks are typically not foods that are going to contain a lot of valuable nutrition. They're just kind of short-term pacifying hunger, but they're not really providing us with any kind of long-term satiety or any kind of nutrition. So make sure we're getting enough with meals and limiting the grazing or snacking in between. You don't have to cut out all snacks, but we want to assess, why are we snacking? Are we getting enough with our meals? And when we do snack, are we getting things that have valuable nutrition and we're not just pacifying that hunger with empty calories? Intermittent fasting has been shown to have lots of benefits, but there's, different people are going to benefit from intermittent fasting in different ways. So that's something that's really a self-assessment, trying to identify where are most of our unhealthy calories coming from. And if we can put some intermittent fasting parameters around those times, it's going to help us to reduce overall calorie intake. But also just because typically the grazing or snacking type foods are not going to be as well thought out, as well planned, or packed with all of those nutrients. So it gives an opportunity, again, to cut out a lot of processed or refined foods. So those are all ways that we can decrease the amount of calories that we're eating and the amount of carbs that we're eating. But again, we still have to make sure that we're staying satisfied, that we are meeting all of our nutritional needs in order for this to be sustainable, because it does us no good to lose 10 pounds and then gain those same 10 pounds back. Actually, you're better off if you would have not lost the 10 pounds in the first place. We call that the yo-yo dieting effect. So while we're implementing these things and we're talking about reducing, we've also got to think about the things that we have to increase, things that we need to do to meet our nutritional needs, or our nutritional quotas, as I like to call them. And so those foods that we want to increase are going to be your lean proteins. So that's going to consist of things like eggs, any kind of white meat, so like chicken, turkey, fish. Shellfish is fine too. For red meat, as long as it's a lean cut of red meat, like a sirloin, that's considered a lean protein as well. I do recommend consuming some sort of protein with every single meal. It can be a plant-based protein, but remember, those plant-based proteins are going to have a lot more carbohydrates than you do protein, so it is going to be very difficult to achieve low carb and low calorie on a vegan or plant-based diet. Non-starchy vegetables is one we want to increase as well. So non-starchy vegetables are any vegetable other than corn, potatoes, dried beans, or peas. Those four are going to go into your carb category, but any other vegetable, so think of anything green, anything you would put in a salad, any vegetable other than corn, potatoes, dried beans, and peas is called a non-starchy vegetable. We should be getting at least 2 to 4 servings of those in a day. Many people that I encounter, myself included, are not meeting that. Most of us get 1 to 2 in on a good day. 2 to 4 vegetables a day, or if you watch some prior videos and we talked about the plate method, half the plate vegetables, those non-starchy vegetables. Whole grains, so not just elimination of carbs, but swapping those refined carbs, those white carbs, those added sugars, those liquid sugars, instead for a whole grain. So when you're looking at a food and on the label it says whole grain bread, or a carbohydrate with color is another good rule of thumb to think of healthy carbs. So think sweet potatoes, brown rice, berries, any kind of dried beans or peas, so things like lima beans, black eyed peas, pinto beans. Those are going to be what we call your complex carbs. What makes them a complex carbohydrate is the fact that they have fiber. So fiber is much more chemically complex, and all that means is it takes longer for our body to digest those foods, and so we are releasing the sugars or carbs in that food at a slower and steadier rate. And what that means is that energy is coming in slow and steady instead of all at once. So carbs that release their sugars slowly, those sugars are entering in slowly. As we move and do our regular activities, we have a greater ability to burn those sugars because they're coming in small amounts over time instead of all at once, as opposed to our refined carbohydrates. So swapping out your white carbs for carbs with color is a good tip. And then remembering, it's still, even though it's a healthy carb, it still turns into sugar. So just cutting back on the amount so that we can reduce the amount of total carbs consumed in a day. So that is all the tips and pointers that I have for you from the dietary standpoint of this. To get the best results when it comes to losing weight to help manage diabetes or reverse pre-diabetes or insulin resistance, you really want complementary diet, exercise, maybe some medications on board as well. That's going to give you the best defense against this. So when it comes to exercise, again, that's another one where, just like the vegetables, we are missing the mark. We are not getting adequate amounts of exercise. So we want to increase caloric expenditure, and I want you to think about this in how can I increase how many calories I burn from a short-term stance, but also from a long-term stance as well. And the long term is what typically gets missed in all of this. A lot of times when people are thinking of exercise and thinking of weight loss, their go-to is typically cardio, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not going to capture all of the benefits that you need as well. So the main thing that you're going to achieve with cardio, so something like walking, running, swimming, riding a bike, aerobics, you're going to get increased heart rate, increased blood flow, and of course you're going to burn calories during that window of time that you do the exercise, and maybe a couple hours beyond that exercise. But that's really it. You're not going to have a very long-term benefit from that cardiovascular exercise. So while you're doing your cardio, you also want to make sure you're implementing strength training, because with strength training, we can increase lean body muscle mass, which is imperative for increasing your metabolism. So as we are aging and as we are growing less and less, our metabolism is constantly slowing. Our energy demand is much lower compared to children and adolescents that are still growing muscle and bone and tissue, but we don't have the ability to grow tissue or bone anymore unless you have a broken bone or a non-healing wound or a wound that's actively trying to heal. So the only thing that we can elect to grow to increase that metabolic rate is going to be muscle, lean body muscle mass. And you're going to only be able to get that through resistance training. So that could mean with weights, but it could also mean with body weight. So when we work those muscle groups to the point of fatigue, then that muscle has to regenerate or regrow itself. And it takes about 24 to 48 hours for that to happen. And during that window of time, I want you to think of your muscles like Miss Pac-Man, and it's just eating up lots of sugar, protein, calories, it uses fluids, certain vitamins, and it uses all that for that tissue regeneration. And so when you are exercising like that, and if you're doing some sort of strength training exercise every 48 hours, you're going to stay in a higher metabolic rate. And so it really is best to get a combination of some cardiovascular to burn calories here and now and help put us at that calorie deficit. But don't forget, a really important piece is that resistance training, building that lean body muscle mass. And then that will help us to burn more of that fat, which again is contributing to insulin resistance. And that's why the diet and the exercise, they really go hand in hand. They should really complement each other. Which kind of brings me to my next point is, you have to make these small changes for yourself, one complementing the other, so that you can have continual progress in your journey. I see so many times, so many upsets, so many feelings of failure and disappointment when people are not able to achieve whatever that desired weight goal is. So many people are pinning all of their success on the number on the scale. And while it is, that is the goal with this, right, where we said weight loss, but I want you to give yourself a little bit of grace in this and have some other things that on your journey to that weight loss that you can see yourself making some accomplishments, making some headway, so that you have some ongoing motivation throughout, and you're not just only satisfied with the end result, that you're seeing some progression. I like to call those progressive markers, so you can see yourself working your way to that goal. So there's lots of different ways that you can measure this, and for some people they feel more strongly about other areas. So maybe a good measure would be something like with exercise, maybe stamina, maybe being able to complete a workout without having to stop. Maybe the first couple times you do a workout, you're having to hit pause or take a few minutes, and maybe you have to do that 3 or 4 times during the workout. And over time, maybe only you're having to pause once or twice, and then eventually you're able to go through the whole thing. Or just with your regular activities, maybe you can make it up the stairs less out of breath. Strength, of course, if you're able to lift more heavier weights or do more reps, that's a great measure of strength and progress. Things like, can you see more lean body muscle mass? Do you see less fatty tissue, smaller waistline? Things like improved energy is a big one. So having better energy levels throughout the day, not feeling that crash and burn, having maybe a better immune system. Maybe you're getting more vitamins and minerals in your diet, and so your body is a little bit healthier and you're getting sick less often. Better quality sleep. So all of these things are things that we need to be looking at, not just the number on the scale, and we should see these changes as we go and help us to meet that end result. So I hope these were some helpful tips in diet and exercise that you can begin on your journey with managing diabetes, prediabetes, insulin resistance, or PCOS, any of the above. I would tell you, start with the diet and exercise, and I have some guidelines here of when do I seek additional help for this? At what point do I say, okay, this isn't working? And like I said, there are some medications that can be really helpful in this. It's very important that you remember that you cannot rely just on the medications or this will not work. You might make a little headway and then you're going to regress again. So these medications really are designed to be an adjunct to the diet and exercise that we've talked about. There are various medications, some that target purely insulin resistance and some that target weight. Maybe that's an appetite suppressant, maybe that's another medication, that's gut hormones to help with weight reduction. Those are all good things, but you have to view them as adjunct to your diet and exercise. You can't rely on that as a standalone, or it will not work, or if it does work, it's going to work very short term for you. So how to assess? When is it time to sit down and talk with your provider or maybe a dietitian about, hey, this diet and exercise is not working? A really good goal, I would say, is you should be seeing on average half a pound a week of weight loss, anywhere from half a pound up to 2 pounds a week, and that's gonna vary. If you have more weight to lose, or if you're able to make super aggressive changes, you're gonna see those higher numbers of weight loss. But even half a pound a week, is steady pace. That's headed in the right direction. I would say you don't necessarily need to go in and talk about medications at that point if you're losing at least half a pound a week. Or if you wanted to kind of do more of a long-term stance of this, if you're losing at least 5% of your body weight in a 3-month time frame, that is adequate weight loss. But again, you have to assess that and really think, okay, have I put my best foot forward consistently in that time frame? Not perfection. No one's perfect. We're going to have some, errors and things like that. But are you consistently putting in good faith effort in that diet and exercise, and maybe still not meeting those benchmarks we talked about, either a half a pound a week or 5% in a 3-month time frame, that's when I would advise you sit down with either your healthcare provider or a registered dietitian, and we can talk about maybe there's some other strategies we need to be using in diet and exercise, or maybe we need some medications to be our ally in this. So I hope that sheds some light on the subject for you of what insulin resistance is and how do we combat this, and some tips that you can start on from a lifestyle standpoint with diet and exercise. So give me some comments below. Don't forget to like the video. Let me know what strategies that you think are going to be useful for you to implement, and if you have some pointers or suggestions for other topics to talk about in future videos. Thanks so much for watching.